Η δεύτερη ανακοίνωση θα γίνει από τον κύριο Πirivatrić, επιστημονικό συνεργάτη του Ινστιτούτου Βυζαντινών, Ερευνών της Σερβικής Ακαδημίας Επιστημών και Τεχνών, μόνιμο υποστηρικτή της Αγιορειτικής Εστίας. Το θέμα είναι ο Άγιος Σάββας και η ίδρυση της Αυτοκέφαλης Ορθόδοξης Αρχιεπισκοπής Σερβίας, 1219.
Σεβαστοί πατέρες, αξιότιμες κυρίες, αξιότιμοι κύριοι, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι και συνάδελφες, είναι και αξιότιμοι κύριε Πρόεδρε, είναι τιμή μου σήμερα να μιλήσω περί της ίδρυσης της Αυτοκέφαλης Αρχιεπισκοπής της Σερβίας, όμως για κάποιο τεχνικό λόγο για το οποίο ζητάω συγγνώμη και το λάθος είναι δικό μου, θα μιλήσω όχι στα ελληνικά όπως ήταν προαναφερετέν, παρά στην αγγλική γλώσσα. The foundation of the Autocephalous Archbishoprics of all the Serbian and maritime lands, usually dated in the scientific literature and in the church tradition to 1219, and the role of Saint Sava in that process, are examined in the wider context of the crisis of the Byzantine world and the growing influence of the Roman pontiff in Southern Eastern Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean before and after the pivotal year of 1204, especially with regard to the crisis of the institutions of emperor and ecumenical patriarchate, its relations with the Archbishoprics of Bulgaria, with its seat in Ohrid, as well as to the rising power of the local dynasty in the Serbian lands and the emergence of the Serbian kingdom in 1217, as all these factors had a decisive impact on its creation. Emperors Isaac II and Alexios III Angeli, whose consecutive ascension to the Byzantine imperial throne was the result of the Byzantine dynastic crisis and the general crisis of the entire social system established under the previous Komnenian dynasty, tried in different ways to tie the rising Serbian ruling family of Nemanjić to the empire, whose positions in the hinterlands of the Balkan Peninsula, following several years of military offensive launched shortly after the death of Manuel I Komnenos in 1180, by various enemies, the Hungarian Serbs, Normans, Bulgarians, and Vlachs, had weakened, particularly during the passing of the Crusaders' army led by Friedrich I Barbarossa in 1189, although the victory of Isaac Angelos against Stefan Nemanja on the Morava River, the chronology is probably in 1191, had temporarily restored the empire's control over the route Belgrade, Niš, Sofia, Constantinople. The arranged dynastic marriage between Nemanja and Evdokia, Nemanja was the second son of Grand Župan Stefan Nemanja and Evdokia the niece of Emperor Isaac, with the provision that the couple was to inherit the throne in Serbia, which came to fruition only after the cup in Byzantium in 1195, when the bride's father Alexios ascended the throne and Nemanja abdicated in 1196, the granting of the senior court title of Sebastokrator to Stefan Nemanja II, Stefan Nemanjić, the future first crowned, or protosteptos, as the emperor's son-in-law, probably at the time when he succeeded his father, and the handing over of the abandoned Hilandar monastery of Mount Athos to monks Stefan, then Simeon Nemanja, and his son Sava in 1198. All of this reinforced the ties between the two ruling families and two states on new grounds, based on the model of participation of the Serbian dynasty in familial rule of Roman Byzantine Автοκράtor, replacing thus the old model of a bureaucratic vassal relationship between the emperor and the Grand Župan. which had been in place for over half of a century. However, extant sources offer no indication that Serbian rulers in the 12th century sought to secure the royal title or to establish an autonomous church in the territory of their state, which was split between two jurisdictions, the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Catholic, as we heard a few hours earlier from Professor Delicari, with the two theoretically overlapping in part. Their aspirations, the aspiration of the dynasty to the royal title, were tied to a specific context. Vukan, Stefan Nemanja's firstborn son, who had been bypassed in the line of succession, bore the title of King of Dioclea and Dalmatia, no doubt drawing on, despite not being formally crowned, the traditions of the former kingdom of Dioclea from 11th century, which now made up the heartlands of his realm. The rise of papal power under Pope Innocent III from the end of the century, brought Southern Eastern Europe into the sphere of interest of the Roman Catholic Church, with aspirations of establishing its jurisdiction and the sacralization of local rulers through coronation ceremonies performed by papal legates. In the context of the Byzantine dynastic crisis, after the escape of young Alexios, the son of the deposed Isaac, from Constantinople to the west in the summer of 1201, Stephen banished Evdokia, thereby distancing himself from Alexios III. Stephen's request to the Holy See to be crowned king did not come to fruition only because of the objections of King Emeric of Hungary. Vukan briefly overthrew Stephen with Emeric's assistance in spring of 1202 at the latest, hoping that this patronage would secure him crown from papal legates. However, Stephen soon returned to power as Grand Župan, temporarily abandoning his ambitions to secure the royal title. The model of papal policy, union first, then the royal coronation, was implemented in the case of Kaloyan, emperor of the Bulgarians and Vlachs, in November of 1204. Here in the map we see the situation around the beginning of the 13th century, just before the big changes in the southern East Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean will occur. In the meantime, the outcome of the Fourth Crusade and the fall of Constantinople to the Crusaders in April 1204, the collapse of the empire of the Romans, of Byzantines, its subsequent division and the foundation of the so-called Latin Empire of Constantinople and of the Roman Catholic Patriarchate in Constantinople, as well as the foundation of several other states governed by the Crusade leaders, had fundamentally changed the general political landscape. An important consequence was a sui generis crisis of two key Roman Byzantine institutions, the emperor and the Orthodox Patriarch, their forced exile from Constantinople, and gradual re-establishment in Nicaea as the Roman, Constantinopolitan, and ecumenical authorities through the election of the Patriarch of Constantinople in Nicaea, and his subsequent anointing and crowning of Theodore Laskaris as the Emperor of Romans in April 1208, a phenomenon that was met with varying degrees of acceptance in the Byzantine world. Meanwhile, monk Sava became archimandrite, returned from Mount Athos to Serbia as an archimandrite and began working towards the stabilization of local circumstances after the resolution of the conflict between Stefan and Vukan, having brought back the relics of the venerable Simeon Nemanja, the progenitor of the dynasty. The relics were ceremoniously led to the rest in his endowment of Studenica in February of 1207, the seat of the archimandrite, which was as such excluded from the jurisdiction of the local Orthodox bishop, as well as of the Archbishop of Bulgaria in Ohrid, which at the moment was under temporal rule of Kaloyan of Bulgaria. Here we see the jurisdiction of the Archbishop of Bulgaria with its seat in Ohrid at the beginning of 13th century, just before the big crisis of the Byzantine world. At the map, it is not indicated the core of the Serbian state, which was in the region of Ras, where one of the most western bishoprics of Bulgaria, of Ohrid, was situated. This is nowadays Novi Pazar in Serbia. As it regards political views, Sava restored in Serbia an essentially Byzantine political system centered on the person of Alexios III, a kinsman of the ruling family of Serbia and the last Orthodox emperor crowned at Hagia Sophia, regardless of the fact that Alexios was now an emperor without an empire or any real power. Due to the scarcity of surviving sources, we have no specific information about the views of the Serbian ruling family on the processes aimed at restoring the empire at Nicaea, particularly after the failed attempts of Alexios III to take over the empire from his son-in-law, Theodore Laskaris, which ended with his disaster in 1211. Following two unsuccessful attempts at marital diplomacy of Nemanjić family towards the Epirus-based branch of the Angeli or Komneni or Ducades dynasty in 12 Ducai dynasty in 1215 and 1216, the political background of which can only be speculated about, there was a major shift in the general political orientation of Grand Župan Stefan. The complex background of such a decision must have been at least partly caused by the alliance of the Hungarian king and the Latin emperor aimed at dividing his state among themselves. As far as the arrangement of marriages between members of ruling houses reflects foreign policy, the marriage of Stefan Nemanjić to a Western European Roman Catholic princess, Anna Dandolo, in the first half of 1217, was an indicator that the ruler of Serbia had sought support outside of the Byzantine world. At this time, despite his brother's protestations, Archimandrit Sava had already left the Serbian state for some unknown reason and had returned to Mount Athos. The coronation of Stefan in the second half of 1217 must have been preceded by a kind of agreement between him and Pope Honorius III, the specifics of which remain unknown. The coronation made Stefan Nemanjić one of many rulers whose royal power had been sacralized by the Holy See. The fact that Stefan was crowned by papal legates and that the coronation must have been preceded by a certain confessional act, regardless of whether this act in itself meant a major shift in the ecclesiastical landscape or had merely heralded it, is of crucial importance for understanding the circumstances in the run-up to Sava's journey to Nicaea and his future investiture there. But among the circumstances which characterize the general state of the Orthodox Church in the decades before and after the catastrophe of 1204, which directly or indirectly created the conditions for the consecration of Sava as archbishop and for the further foundation of the autocephalous archbishoprics of Serbia, of specific significance was the prominent role of the Roman Byzantine emperor in the church, marked by his title of Epistemonarchis of the church. The title of Epistemonarchis, as it regards the emperor, epitomized the different prerogatives that he had in the church in the epoch of the Komneni imperial dynasty, such as the appointment, so-called provlices, of the patriarch and other clerics of the episcopal rank, as well as the limitation of ecclesiastical dioceses. A comparison of the autocephalous archbishoprics of Cyprus with that of Bulgaria, with its seat in Ohrid, according to the process of acceptance or rejection of the Nicene imperial and patriarchal authorities as authentic of the renewed empire, yields new insight into the general conditions under which Saint Sava made his journey to Nicaea, which resulted in his investiture. The Patriarch in Nicaea was asked to accept certain decisions of the Synod of autocephalous archbishoprics of Cyprus, which had been made independently from the imperial authority as a result of its silence during the events of 1204. That regarded the election of the new Archbishop of Cyprus, which was normally under normal conditions a pronomion of the emperor. On the other hand, as the sources proves, the archbishoprics of Cyprus considered the Nicene Emperor Theodore Laskaris entitled to make traditional imperial appointment of the new archbishop. So the Patriarch in Nicaea, with his synod, accepted in 1209 the decisions of the archbishoprics of Cyprus about the former election about the earlier election of the new archbishoprics and some other elections and investitures, thus confirming the factual liturgical unity of the two churches, considering the new archbishop of Cyprus as his beloved spiritual brother, agapitos πνευματικός αδελφός, and a colleague, συλλητουργός. However, in contrast to this example, the synod of the autocephalous archbishoprics of Bulgaria and Ohrid elected Dimitrios Chomatinos as archbishop in 1216, after he had been appointed for the position by the Lord of Epirus, by Theodoros Doukas, thus neglecting, under the influence of the latter, the imperial authority of Theodore Laskaris. I would like to remind that both traditionally in 12th century, on the beginning of the 13th, the normal, so-called normal situation as it regards the relation of the imperial authority in Constantinople and the two autocephalous churches that in Ohrid and in Cyprus, in Bulgaria and Cyprus, was that archbishop of those churches was to be chosen by the emperor and consecrated by the local synod. That was so-called normal situation established in the earlier period. But now, after 1204, we see how the situation changed. So Chomatinos was not elected and appointed by the emperor in Nicaea. And as shown by one of his letters, that one of 1222, neither the ecumenical patriarch in Nicaea, nor, it is certain, the emperor, had recognized Chomatinos' investiture at that time. This meant that the ecumenical patriarchate and the archbishoprics of Bulgaria were not at that moment in complete liturgical communion, and that Chomatinos' name could not have been inscribed into the patriarchal diptycha. The fact that in these years the ecclesiastical seats of Nicaea and Ohrid were in de facto undeclared schism certainly provided an important argument in favor of Sava's request that, at the command of the emperor, the patriarch should consecrate an archbishop, especially for his fatherland, which was the region of the so-called Serbian and maritime lands, the core of which, the region of Ras, was under the jurisdiction of the Archbishop of Ohrid, as we see on the map. What is more, under such extraordinary conditions in the church, we can perceive one of the reasons which led Sava to quit Athos and to make journey to Nicaea to address there the emperor. The manner in which Archimandrit Sava addressed to Emperor Theodore Laskaris in Nicaea, asking for the appointment and consecration of an archbishop for his fatherland, shows that, without doubt, Sava viewed the emperor as epistemonarchis of the church, a ruler granted with the charismatic ability to reveal the will of God in matters such as the appointing of the highest clergy of the church. Another important moment in Sava's address to the emperor was their kinship. In his request to the emperor for the appointment, the first archbishop, future archbishop of Serbian and maritime lands, Sava emphasized his kinship with Theodore Laskaris, i.e. the kinship of the two ruling families. The marriage of Stefan and Evdokia had offspring, so the kinship between the two dynasties survived the dissolution of the marriage and proved as politically important in the years to come. Sava's plea had put a very significant political and ecclesiological moment into account, the mentioning of emperor's name in the diptycha read during the holy archpriest liturgies, which meant that the hierarchical supremacy of Theodore Laskaris as an authentic Orthodox emperor, so-called Greek emperor, in Serbian lands would in this way also be recognized in the state of the Nemanjić dynasty. This was a precondition for this territory to become again considered as a part of the Byzantine ecumene and to be put under the jurisdiction, although temporary, of the ecumenical patriarch by emperor's decision. The emperor's attitude concerning the patriarch's jurisdiction over those eparchies of archbishoprics of Ohrid that were positioned with the state of Nemanjić dynasty was, of course, above all, a consequence of a de facto church schism, which I mentioned a bit before. So, in conclusion, the autocephalous Orthodox Archbishopric of Serbia was founded by two consecutive acts of the Byzantine Emperor Theodore Laskaris and the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, Manuel, and his permanent synod in Nicaea in 1219. There is a speculation now regarding this chronology, but it's not the moment to come in details into that problem, and as I said, the accepted year is 1219, although there is a supposition that it may happen 1 year earlier. The first consecrated archbishop of all the Serbian and maritime lands was Archimandrit Sava of Athos, appointed by the emperor. The foundation of a new regional autocephalous Orthodox Church was an important confirmation of the imperial and patriarchal authority under the conditions of crisis created by their involuntary exile. Among the most important direct consequences of Sava's embassy was the rooting of the Serbian lands within the orbit of Byzantine civilization, the Byzantine ecumene, which as a feedback supported the consolidation of the imperial and patriarchal institution in exile as the heart of Byzantine political and ecclesiastical order. The next step was the demand of Archbishop Sava for the right of self-consecration of the future archbishops. This right of self-consecration is now in the, not only now, but in the tradition, in the church tradition, and in the, also in the works of historiographers, understood as equal to the autocephalous status of a regional church. It means that the new leader of the church should be elected and consecrated at the local synod, and by a local synod without any interventions from any other church, from any other jurisdiction. And we know from the future history of Serbian church that this was exactly the case from 1219 onwards, or from 1229. There is also a dispute in historiography whether the right of autocephalous status of the new archbishoprics was declared in the 1219 or in 1229, but this controversy is not important for the moment. So the decisions of the emperor and patriarch had very soon resulted in the creation of a network of Orthodox bishoprics in a new regional church, which was in ecclesiastical communion with the patriarchate in Nicaea. And this was specially declared that the patriarch should be mentioned as the first in the diptycha of the new church, and which established a counterpoint, of course, in relation to the ecclesiastical conceptions and policy of the Roman Catholic Church. In this, Archbishop Sava had the support of the local monarchical authority personalized in his brother Stefan, whom he consecrated king in the coronation ritual at the monastery of Žiča, presumably in 1221, the seat of the new archbishoprics and the coronation church of the future rulers as well. Can you please change the picture? Here we see the territory of the Ohrid archbishoprics of Bulgaria after the consecration of Sava, which was in detail researched by Professor Delicari in her book. And this provoked also the protest of Homatinos, of the Archbishop of Bulgaria, but we will not discuss this today. So with this act of coronation, and I will conclude here, were established the foundations of the political system that in the lands under the dominion of the Nemanjić dynasty would last for almost 150 years. Thank you very much.